how do I know if what I'm actually experiencing then is spiritual warfare, or if it is something like a mental health challenge or a mental health illness that I'm experiencing instead?
Yeah, and I think this is a really good discussion to have, because I think we as people are complex. If you believe what the Bible says, we are created in His image. It's impossible to ignore that He's three parts, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So it's easy to reflect in us how we are also three parts, right? So there's the physical, what you can touch and what you can see. There's also the internal, which, and I define this as mental and emotional, right? Because you can't see those unless they're acted out upon. And then there's the spiritual, right? So that's kind of how I look at it. And I think with a question like this, the answer is incredibly complex. And to break it down into a simple answer, I think is important, but every disease process that we have can manifest in any one of those parts. Particularly, let's say there's a physical trauma, there's a car accident. You see that, you feel that. There's obvious deformity in the body, but there's obvious also mental and emotional components to that as well. You know, the spiritual, the unseen part, that's a little bit more sort of nebulous at times, but you still also, it should not be ignored, you know. What I would advise in someone that is really debating about this, I would really, number one, I would bring it to the ultimate physician, you know,
Amen.
Bring it to God first, you know. Sometimes He gives us stuff to deal with because it's sequelae of decisions that we've made. For example, when a pilot crashes a plane, 61% of the time it's pilot error. And I'm not saying that in all cases sin leads to mental illness. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that mental illness, in fact, is a physical or physiological issue. It's related to neurotransmitter imbalances and all sorts of stuff in the brain. But God also rewards all growth with pruning, and the branches that bear fruit have to be cut back. So God never promises our life to be easy, to be free of bumps in the road. In fact, it's sort of expected that we're supposed to do hard things. And going through hard things, prior traumas, complex disease states, where there's a manifestation in multiple realms, for example, the emotional, the physical, and the mental. Each one of those parts of the disease process should be targeted and treated, right? So if somebody's depressed, it would be foolish to say 100% of your problem is spiritual, okay? Is it possible? Sure. You can have spiritual attacks that cause all sorts of issues, but really, a person going through something like this, I would highly recommend to seek out to get expert help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In addition to that, take a really good look at your own life. You know, what can you take ownership of? What can you bring to the foot of the cross? And I'm not saying again that the disease process is sequelae of your own sin, but sometimes people have a lordship issue. You know, if they can't pay the bills, do they really need to go to Starbucks all the time? Stuff like that. That also causes mental stress.
The lack of money causes stress.
Exactly.
And then it can I mean, that's a minor example, right?
Yeah,
but
sure.
it's a pretty relevant example.
Yeah. And there's a phenomenon called somatization, which means that
That's a big word.
it is. Soma means body.
That's why we brought the doctor on.
Yeah, no kidding.
Just to say big words.
Yeah, exactly. It makes this doctor sound more intelligent. But any disease process it can manifest in the physical body, and up to 80% of disease processes, if they start mental, can manifest as physical, which is why it's really hard to pinpoint and say like, oh, this is an emotional problem. This is a mental problem. This is a mental illness. And the problem is the things that we see in the Bible that are clearly demonic, for example, the supernatural manifestations, the voices, all that stuff. there's two big disease processes. One is schizophrenia, and the other one is dissociative personality disorder that can have voices.
Yeah.
And the worst thing that we could do in the church is for someone that comes in that has a physiologic mental issue and be like, oh, you got a demon, you know,
Automatically. That's it. No matter what. That's what a lot of times churches do that. A lot of times Christians.
Exactly. But I'm not at the same time denying the fact that disease processes cannot be demonically empowered. Particularly if there's habitual sin, if there's open doors, occultic behavior. You know, here in Yuma, we live in a border town, and a lot of stuff is coming across that border that is spiritually empowered. For sure.
Absolutely. And you know, I just heard this yesterday that America has the highest number of mental illness than any country in the world, and it's increasing. Like, we have the fastest growing rate all across the board of every mental illness. And I'm thinking, like, we got everything here, right? We have all this freedom. Why do we even have that? And then in the church world, we have this. It's got to be binary. It's got to be either physical or spiritual. Like, why can't? And my theory has always been, I did a series a few years ago called "Why Am I Not Happy?" and I even talked about my own struggles with depression over the years and stuff, and how that I realized finally that it's not just a lack of faith, I need to pray harder, or there's maybe something sinful that I'm doing that's causing me to have guilt that, you know, because I'm doing this sin thing that I need to get rid of, and then I'm better. Or it's just everything's going fine and I'm not doing, you know, when I say not doing anything wrong, you guys know what I mean? Not like perfect, but, you know, seemed like things are going the way I'm supposed to be going, but then I'm still having this attack. And I came to the conclusion through the Bible and through doctors and other things that it can be both. That it can be physical and spiritual, maybe one more than the other. We don't just, and the problem with, I believe, in our country, the reason we're not getting relief, and I'm not saying other countries are getting relief through the spiritual aspect. I think in our country, we have so much access to medical care, maybe more than others, and correct me if I'm wrong. I know there's some more developing countries like us that have the access to medical care, but maybe, this is a theory that I have, and I don't know if it's proven or anything like that, but maybe it's because we are denying the spiritual component too much. Like, we're saying it's immediately, instead, like you said a minute ago, go to the great physician. Like, when you have a problem, and I'm not saying if you're like, you know, you're bleeding out, you're like, Lord, heal me, before you go to the emergency room. I'm not saying that. Like, I'm saying, like, if you start feeling whatever, never happened to you before, like you said, let's talk to God about it first. Let's get some prayer from some Christian people around me that are strong in the Word, is strong in the Lord. And if this is not helping, or if it's getting increasingly more, hearing voices or whatever, I mean, maybe not to that extreme, but, you know, we want to do it before we get to that extreme, like, also go see a doctor, but let's go to the Lord first. And I think what we do now is we immediately go, let's go to a counselor, let's go to a doctor, let's get a pill. And we have access to pills in this country.
And that's its own epidemic.
Probably more than anybody else. So I don't know. I just said all that. I don't know if there's a question or whatever, a thought in there. But
well, I like the fact that you brought up the binary piece, because like that comparison happens a lot. And people always seem to go with it either has to be this or this. But they both can happen simultaneously. When God created us, He created us in His image. He created us as a spirit in a physical body. So matter and the spiritual happen at the same time. So they both can be happening simultaneously.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the Bible clearly talks about mind renewal. But before we sort of elaborate on that, acute mental health care in this country is terrible. It is. It really started to get really bad when the Reagan administration closed down state hospitals. And if you look at sort of the number of acute care beds for mental illness then versus now, a fraction of them are available. And if you think about the practice of medicine, and when I say this, I'm talking about all fields of medicine, psychiatry, what I do, all sorts of stuff. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm an interventional radiologist, which means I play video games inside people all day long.
And fix them.
But at the same time, the proof is in the pudding, right? So if you treat a physiologic problem with a physiologic solution, you'll get an answer. If you treat a spiritual problem with a physiologic solution, you'll get an answer, but it's not a good one. And what doctor is going to be able to recognize and treat something that's demonically empowered.
Right.
Right. And the ultimate issue is the field of psychology and psychiatry have great treatments. But the problem is, like, there's no solution for the guilt of sin in
That's right.
medicine.
Yeah.
And guilt in itself is an incredible stress on the mind. When looking at things like guilt, in my mind, there's two components. There's conviction and there's guilt. Conviction leads you to the throne. Guilt takes you away from it.
Yeah.
But getting back to what you said about our composition and our makeup, it's absolutely true. And I think we in today's society are bombarded with information. Like, I even think back to when I was a kid and the newspaper came out, a couple times a week. There's comics on Sundays and there's cartoons, and that was great. But we are constantly bombarded with information, and what that does, that stresses our mind to process such information in such a way that spurs towards anxiety. And anxiety is a horrible disease process. Anxiety is like paying an invoice that you've never received, but you pay it over and over and over again. And it's incredibly distracting. And I think that anxiety mindset is crippling for some.
Yeah.
And I think that what the Bible tells us to do about that is to focus on what we have as opposed to what we don't have. Focus on the solution, not the problem.
Yeah.